So welcome to a special edition of At the Table with AACC, or the Asian American Christian Collaborative. At the Table is a series of roundtable discussions where Asian American Christian pastors, leaders can draw from their experiences, their education, and their expertise to discuss questions and issues that impact the Asian American Christian community, the church, and the broader church at large. We're here today at the historic Chinese Community Church of Washington, D.C., in the Chinatown area of our nation's capital. The church was founded in 1935 and is the only church in D.C., is the only Chinese church in D.C. proper. I'm thrilled to be here with Phil Kim, who I'll have him share a little bit more about his experience. My name is Ray Chang, and I serve as the president of the Asian American Christian Collaborative. Phil, you happen to work at the White House. Can you tell us a little bit about your role, what you do as we dive in?
Thank you, Ray, and I'm excited to be here. Grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation. So my name is Phil Kim. I serve as a senior advisor in the Office of Public Engagement at the White House. And I guess really the essence of what we do is that we see ourselves as the front door to the administration. And it's a privilege and an honor to work for a president and vice president who want to make sure that we're as accessible as possible to folks who traditionally had a seat at the table and folks who haven't had a chance to be here at the table previously. And so it's special to be kind of at the intersection of creating opportunity and seeking new partnerships and finding folks who are interested in working with us. And I think our approach has always been to make ourselves, of course, readily available, but also really to strengthen relationships, try to be more transparent, and work to build accountability amongst the administration and all of our community partners. So I get the exciting job of having to communicate with folks all the time about the work that they're doing, making sure that internally that we have the chance to can share about the good work that's taking place across the community, and then find opportunities to really lift up where we can.
So it sounds like you have the responsibility of dealing with people like me.
Honor and a privilege.
That sounds great for the camera.
I will say it's been really great to work with you and just seeing how you lead with passion, and a set of principles that are very apparent in how you carry yourself. It is truly refreshing for someone like me to see that and get to work with people like yourself, for sure.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And we're going to dive into a little bit more about how I feel mutually because of everything that's in your package. But I am curious if you can kind of tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah.
Who are you? Not just what you do, but tell us about your upbringing, especially around your ethnic and racial and your faith background, and how that ties to some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. So I see myself as a kid from Arcadia, California. That's where I grew up. That is where my parents ultimately decided to settle down, kind of in search of good educational opportunities for myself and my three younger sisters. My parents are Korean, so I'm a son of immigrants. My father owns a small business. He is a mechanic in South Central LA. And one of the things I'm proud of is that he's still got 5 stars on his Yelp account. So he's a trustworthy community guy. People go to him. They've been going to him for decades now. My mom is she was a special needs caretaker, and she worked for the county of LA. And so she has been kind of the driving force in our family to get a good education and really kind of raise the bar in ways that my parents didn't get that kind of opportunity growing up. But I share that because, primarily one, I come from a working class background, and when I was younger, the big dream for me and my sisters really was just to make sure we get into college. It was kind of in search of good opportunities, and we're very blessed to have gone to school at Arcadia High School. But the other part of it too is I never really saw myself as somebody who would be working at the White House one day. It still blows my mind that I get to walk up and down the Navy steps and see the residents and kind of think about the privilege that I have to be in this position to serve the president and the community. So that is, from my youth to today, something I still kind of use to stay grounded in the work. And I think about my parents often to stay grounded in the work as well, because they're the kind of folks who we want to keep opening doors for, folks who never saw themselves as part of the civic community, folks who have limited English proficiency, things like that, that we have to navigate uniquely as Asian Americans in this space. So that's a little bit of where I come from. I think the kind of turning point for me happened in school. So I went to college, I went to UC Berkeley. Very grateful to have been accepted and gone to school there, but I would say that the way that I was brought up was in a Republican household, and so thinking about making sure that we're taking care of our family, and it was important to my father that we had lower taxes and we're able to kind of bring home some income to then be able to invest in our education and things like that. Then I went to college, and it was a completely different worldview on the way that I had seen myself in the work and how I see myself moving forward transparently. And I think one thing I didn't really fully grasp at a younger age was my mom has always been very generous in spirit and thinking about others in the community in a way that I couldn't quite articulate, but didn't really get to appreciate until I went to college and kind of saw how folks saw themselves as a part of the larger community and that there might be a space for someone like me too. And so a lot of those years that I spent in school was grappling with like, how do I want to make my impact? And my dad and I had a really funny moment when I was about to graduate. And he was like, with Berkeley students, I just don't really understand. And obviously he's generalizing, but he would say like, you all got in, you're pretty smart, but you don't want to make money, you want to make a difference. And I really felt that deeply. There is a kind of a religious angle to it too. In my faith journey at the time, I had no sense of what I wanted to do in the deepest way to fulfill what I was hoping would be my calling one day. And I felt really nervous about whether or not I could make a difference. And so I would pray often to think about, like, please lead me, please guide me, and like whatever doors you open up, I promise you that I will apply the parable of talents and double whatever you give to me to make sure that I honor you in this way. And so the thing that I was able to latch onto in the later years of school was organizing, was community organizing, knocking on doors, talking to strangers, all while trying to answer this question for me personally: is there a space for someone like me in community organizing, civic engagement, and/or politics? And the short answer is I've been very grateful to find that along the way a lot of people have supported our community's inclusion, but also there's so much more to do to keep opening the door for others.
Well, how about your faith background? Tell us a little bit about the faith influences in your life.
Yeah.
We've talked offline a little bit, but I'd be curious if how your faith has shaped who you are and even some of your work.
Yes. So my parents, as immigrants, didn't have a natural kind of social backbone, and I think we all found that, and by we I mean my family, I think we discovered that in the Korean church. And so we went to, we grew up predominantly in Logos Gyohe and Logos Church in Pasadena, and that was kind of our social backbone, but also our cultural backbone and our faith backbone. My parents were very invested in the senior pastor there at the time, and for me, it was like a chance to grow up as a young kind of teenager. So, middle school, high school years in particular, I remember getting more and more involved through the worship team, through the missions team, and being able to travel and serve in a very kind of tangible way in community. So, one of my youth pastors, his name was Pastor Larry, someone I still look up to today. He is the kind of guy who helped move me into college. He drove me up there. He's that guy. We did a summer in New Mexico and had a chance to do some work at Native American reservations, but I think that was a very tangible way of thinking about faith in action at that young age for me. And it's not to say that you can't do acts of faith and acts of service in the community that you're in today. You don't have to travel to do any of that work, but I think that's what also kind of helped me open my eyes to how our values as Christians can then be used to serve others, regardless of who that might be at the end of the day. When I went to college, it was a very eye-opening cultural, social experience for myself, and just being unable to feel like I had a space there for me. I didn't feel comfortable naturally when I went to college as a first-generation college student. I didn't have a concept of class, wealth and equity, any of that stuff. And so it was kind of a real-time experience for me, learning how to navigate that. And where I found my refuge was in the church. And so I was a part of a campus ministry called FICB, Fellowships in Christ Berkeley. I met a lot of good mentors there, and some of my best friends to this day are still from that community. Now we're all older, everyone's having kids. It's wonderful, actually. But during that time, I think I also had a chance to participate in the things that I really was passionate about in high school. So, I joined the worship team and supported there. As a young student, I was a cellist, and so I think I found a lot of self-expression and performance and honoring God through music, and so that was a good outlet for me then. And had a chance to, again, do missions, and took part in an organization at the time called KCM, Korean Campus Ministries, and went to China with a mentor who had a profound impact on my life. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from that experience was 1 Corinthians 13, and just being able to dive into that text every single day and think about how nothing really matters unless you do it with love. And so I've always tried to carry that energy and that joy and that spirit to love on others and serve with me. And I'm just grateful that I can bring in that same approach, but in this political kind of arena and civic engagement arena that we find ourselves in today.
Yeah, no, and that's so good, because I think that even just sharing your journey, you see the bridge that's often left out within Asian American churches that has been shaped by an expression of white evangelicalism, which is that their evangelism and missions are important, but social justice is not. And Korean churches, because I grew up in the Korean church, and one of the things I keep calling you is like a unicorn, because you do both, at least at the moment, you're doing both the AAPI outreach work and you're doing the faith outreach work. And so I was like, in one person, you have everything that AACC and my own experiences. And so, it's been deeply encouraging to me, as well as so many other people who, you've interacted with in our community, to interact with you and to hear you speak, and even in the gathering that we convened at the White House together, every single person said interacting with you was it was so eye-opening, it was so transformative, it was so impactful to them. There's within Asian American churches, especially the Korean American churches, one of the things I think are a challenge is that we've emphasized mercy at the neglect of justice. And what you're essentially saying is that they don't have to be separate, that you don't have to separate evangelism and missions from social justice and social action, that there is faith and action, that both of those are what Rene Padilla, who's a theologian in Latin America, would say, two wings of the same airplane. You can't fly a plane without either wing. And so that's helpful to hear you share kind of from your perspective and your even journey, how that manifests.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious, as we're talking about you, what you embody, Korean American, all that, how do you compare the level of Asian Americans, and more specifically Asian American Christians, especially in their engagement or our engagement with politics or political entities, right? In other words, what differences do you see between Asian Americans or Asian American Christians more specifically and other groups? Do you have anything as you're navigating how you see the kind of similarities and where there's divergence and what you kind of hope for? I
guess really quickly take a step back. In terms of the unicorn analogy, I view myself as like a vessel, and I always say this, I say this in jest but in seriousness at the same time, like the Lord uses the weak to lead the strong sometimes, and sometimes I feel very grateful just to be able to continue to do this work and hopefully have an impact on folks who want to get involved. So I'll start there. But when it comes to organizing in this space, I know we have talked about the importance of solidarity amongst different communities, because sometimes there are folks who have been doing this work for much longer and have been able to get historic wins and gains, have also had historic challenges and struggles along the way, all the things that we can use to, that we have benefited from, and by we I mean the Asian American community specifically, and also helps us to amplify and multiply our voice and our power when we can join in solidarity efforts. So I want to start there because I think when we're kind of all in the struggle together, it's important to make sure that we know who our allies are. Personally, I haven't had a chance to engage too much in that space before, and so I'm personally heartened to see that there's a growing movement, there's growing sophistication and organization, and there are Christian leaders and pastors who are willing to take a stand for issues and make ourselves a little bit more visible in that way. my personal experience has been that oftentimes the conversation has always been about taking care of your own flock and making sure that you're edifying your congregation. But there has been, like, one of the things that I've personally looked for in a church community has been, where is the engagement with the broader community to show that we also care about the issues that not only everybody else cares about, but these are the things that we as a community care about. So, like, that is very heartening to see. In terms of the phrase social justice, some people hear that and think it's only a person of color issue, but I don't see it that way. I view it as like, hey, this is a right or wrong issue. And when it comes to, as you so eloquently said, acting on our faith, so our faith's in action, a lot of where I draw my inspiration from Jesus' example is taking care of the poor, talking to the folks who traditionally are marginalized or haven't been talked to, folks who are more vulnerable in our society. To be able to be advocating for that at scale or in this position that we hold within the federal government, that is a mission mindset, but through your professional expression. And so, you know, for me personally, to be able to support that and to see that coming up is really a beautiful thing, for one. But the road also, like as Paul says, it's a marathon. Like we will run for a long time. And so I think the way that I view the work is that we run as fast as we can with the baton that we have. And as other people come up, we just make it easier for them to keep running the race a little bit further. So having that long view helps to keep me grounded in this work. And I hope I can encourage other people to take that same view as they're fighting really hard for the things that matter.
What are some of the ways that we should or even must be involved, right? I think our political imagination as Asian American Christians has been so stunted because, you know, there are racializing forces that say, you know, don't be loud, don't be too active, focus internally within the church community or within the walls of the church. Utilize that only as the only vehicle for social engagement. So this is where the whole good at mercy ministry, we engage with those who are proximate to us. But then if you look at Asian American history, we know that when we don't engage at broader levels as well, so we don't neglect those things, but we don't engage at broader levels, at some point there can be things like exclusion, other forms of marginalization and oppression, through the laws and even our justice system.
Yeah.
How should and must organizations like AACC be involved in the political process? Churches as institutional entities be involved in the political process, and then individuals within churches be involved in the political process?
For sure. So there are a couple different buckets I'd touch on. I think first and foremost, like what you point out is so true. There are myths out there about our community and what we should be like from outside of the Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community. The model minority myth is a very common one, but when you really take a hard look at educational attainments across the spectrum, for example, and you break down that data into specific ethnic groups and racial groups, you're able to then parse out where we can focus our energy to then uplift the members of our community who could use that advocacy the most in the federal government, for example. I say that because the model minority myth is an example of our community not being out there enough to talk about why this matters. And when we think about our role in this kind of civic space, we, as they say, if you're not at the table, you're often on the menu, and people make decisions on behalf of the community without representation there. So representation obviously is half of it. And so seeking to be in those spaces where these decisions are being made, seeking to speak out when the time is right, seeking to organize around issues and push it through our legislative processes. Like, there's a space for everybody to get involved. And this whole ecosystem in which we have it, there is something for everyone, whether you're a policy guy, whether you're a fundraiser, whether you're a community organizer, an advocate, somebody who knows how to navigate the federal government, there's space for everybody. Often I think people have a very specific view of what change should look like, but change happens in our communities, and change often comes to Washington as well. And in our job, I think we're very proactive about seeking out what our community is asking for and what they're needing in real time, or because we've come from the community, we have a sense as well what people want. But the real work and the real change happens when people outside the federal government come and bring all of the things that need to happen to the decision makers, have those conversations, and work in partnership with all of us to advance that football. It could be as easy. I'm biased in my own personal view of this work as somebody who started by registering voters and talking to people at their doors about the issues. It can be as simple as that and making phone calls. It can be as simple as going to a C3 organization that advocates for more language access to the community around you. It could be volunteering for the federal government on things that there's always work to be done. There's always ways to get involved, and this is not a plug. There are just so many different ways to get involved, and I think you hear this often as well, like don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Get started. You will learn a lot through your journey, both about yourself and probably your faith along the way. And also you'll become a more valuable partner in the work the longer you stay committed to it. So I would encourage people just to dive right in.
Yeah. So what are like the first three things that you would say an average citizen, a church community, because that's a big question we get asked. How does a church engage in politics?
Yeah.
Because we don't, we try to serve as AACC, we try to work with people from all stripes of political persuasion, but we also know that there's diversity within our pews and within our communities across the political spectrum. And so I'm curious, what are the first three things, regardless of political stripe, that you would encourage people to engage with the political process? And then how do churches or communities more broadly and specifically engage?
Yeah, for sure. So I know, having had an opportunity to organize in the faith space as well, that you could present one issue and get 20 different perspectives on it, and I totally understand that. So I think one of the ways that I seek to approach this work is thinking about common good, common area issues that we can all collaborate on together. This is kind of a relationship advice that I've received that I think is helpful. It's like, and this is something I learned from Senator Kane, who would say this often, like, are you looking to be right or are you trying to do right? And so when you kind of take a conversational approach to some of the issues of the day with the notion that you want to do something about it rather than winning an argument, I think that will really help to kind of open up the possibilities of how to get involved first and foremost. There are a couple levels to the work. So one, we just had the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington this past weekend here in DC, and one of the most it was a series of really good remarks, of course, and speakers, but I think symbolically it was such a beautiful tapestry of so many different community leaders coming together to speak on continuing this commitment that was birthed 60 years ago. And you had people from all ethnicities and races coming together to speak, people of all genders coming together to speak as well. And I bring all this up to say, one, it's so important to make sure that you understand the history of the struggle of the communities advocating for their rights here in our society, and why we and how we kind of get to this point and why we do what we do today. That, in short, happens by rolling up your sleeves and being willing to lock arms with your brothers and sisters and show up for them, because there will be a time when you're going to need them to show up for you too. I think about, there are a lot of joys in this work. There are also a lot of tragedies that we have to navigate in this work. And I think about the Lunar New Year celebration that we hosted at the White House with the President and the First Lady. That came on the heels of a Monterey Park shooting. And that was heartbreaking, obviously, on a very deep level. But we also have, a gun violence issue in our country. And that is not a political thing. That is a real public health challenge that we face today. And the reason I bring that up is because we've had an opportunity to support other communities when they're going through their tragedies and different horrific examples. And by the same token, oftentimes when we want to push and advocate for different when we want to advocate and pull more levers for change, sometimes it takes all of us. And so all that to say, I think it's really important to make sure that we're supporting all of our brothers and sisters in this fight together. And then lastly, know that our community is not a monolith. You referred to our congregation, the pews, being diverse, and that's true across our community at large. We have East Asian, Southeast Asian, Pacific Island, Native Hawaiian. We have a very broad and beautiful tapestry within our own community, but everybody brings their own kind of flavor to the work. Everyone kind of brings their own history, perspective, and their needs to the work. And I think it's important to invest time in making sure that we are able to build stronger relationships with folks who don't come from our own native country's background, but really expand our perspective on what it means to be NHPI and be in this work together.
That's good. So let's round things out with this question. What's at stake? What happens if we don't engage?
Well,
and then actually, let me follow that up with also, do you have any examples of change that's manifest and materialized because Asian American Christians have been engaged?
So where my mind goes to is that we are emerging from 2.5, 3 years of a pandemic, and the national conversation around that was, this is the fault of Asian Americans. There's some blame that still, I think, to this day exists. And quite frankly, I think there are some people who wanted to stir the pot and blame folks, and we got the short end of the stick, we being the Asian American community here. What we've seen in the years since is a spike in violence, unnecessary deaths, and these are obviously very heavy but real examples of, if we're not participating in this process and advocating for community safety, for our elders, for protecting our elders, for accessing, for accessible language so that people in our community can also access resources when incidents of violence occur, or when they need a PPP loan for their business to stay afloat, since a huge proportion of our community happen to be small. Like, these are the things that matter. And if we don't have a seat at the table, I'll say it again, we will be on the menu and people will make decisions for our community without our input. And the way that conversation is going now, it feels a little bit darker than it did 4 years ago. And if folks don't get involved, then I think it empowers other people to continue that narrative in a way that's unhelpful and actually damaging to our community. So that is not a political thing, that is just a fact of where we are in terms of our civic society. When I think about the role that Asian American Christians played, I think about when we opened up our houses of worship and our churches to become COVID vaccine clinics. I think about being able to translate for our grandparents why it's important to get vaccinated, how to stay safe during this dangerous time that we happen to find ourselves in because of this rise of anti-Asian rhetoric. When I think about advocating for people who live in poverty, that's a lot of folks who happen to be Asian Americans as well. And that's, again, I think masked by the fact that we have this model minority myth that we operate with as a society, but there are, like so many of our limited English proficiency proficient elders, our aunts, our uncles, our grandparents, they need help. And I feel like the Asian American Christian community really leads the way in being able to support them spiritually, of course, day-to-day service, but also like being able to advocate for them in a way that doesn't get picked up by most other communities. So we do play that unique role in the civic space. Right.
That's so great. Well, Phil, this was such a rich conversation. So thankful for you and the work that you're doing, for tolerating all the calls and the texts and receiving them with so much grace and warmth, and just so thankful that you were able to join us at the table.